I disagree with that, and I would also point out that the President of the United States, with advice of the entire Cabinet, made the determination about the applicability of the Geneva Conventions.
Senator Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Haynes, and thank you for your service. You've served your country in uniform. I know your son is an ROTC now and seeking to be a military officer, and I know you love and respect the military, and I know that you care about getting this matter right. But I would just ask you this question because despite what the accusations have been made here today and criticisms and second guessings, I think the evidence shows that it was intensely legally studied all throughout this process, and I believe Mr. Goldsmith, who thought that President Bush was too aggressive in some of these matters, and after he left the Department of Justice wrote a book, and I'll ask you if you agree with him. Many people believe the Bush administration had been indifferent to these legal constraints in the fight against terrorism. In my experience, the opposite is true. The administration has paid scrupulous attention to law, close quote. Do you think y'all paid scrupulous attention to law and trying to get this right?
Every time I acted, I understood the enormous responsibilities of my job, and I tried to do that.
And he also wrote, quote, many people think the Bush administration has been indifferent to wartime legal constraints, but the opposite is true. The administration has been strangled by law, and since September 11, 2001, this law has been lawyered to death, close quote. There's just some truth in that, in your opinion?
Oh, yes, sir, I think so.
And with regard to these techniques that were discussed and approved, did you say that Major General, two-star General Dunleavy, who headed the Guantanamo Joint Task Force, was a judge?
He's a judge in civilian life.
And so this is a lawyer and a judge, and he has the advice of a judge advocate general attorney on his staff, and they concluded that they had a high-valued individual there who claimed to be a falconer, but who had met with Muhammad Atta and had been rearrested in, was it Iraq, Afghanistan?
I think he was captured in Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan. And the normal interrogation techniques had not worked, and they submitted a request to do enhanced techniques. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And that came up through General Hill, and he's the Southcom commander, a four-star general.
Yes, sir.
And you evaluated the categories and the requested techniques, and you had to make a recommendation to the Secretary of Defense. You were his lawyer, and you had to recommend that.
Yes, sir.
Now, you had other things on your plate at this time, too, did you not?
I did.
And but you evaluated. Did you rubber stamp what they asked you, or did you pare back in any way the requests that they had made?
I did not rubber stamp. Indeed, I recommended that only a subset of the requested techniques be applied.
Well, you say a subset, but you rejected the Category 4 techniques and the Category 3 techniques, or all, I think all of those. Is that correct?
There were 3 Category 3 techniques that I recommended not be used.
And so that was your recommendation to the Secretary of Defense, and he approved that?
Yes, sir.
Now, after that, is it not so that other JAG officers raised questions about this and the wisdom of some of these techniques, and a working group came together?
Well, sir, that requires some explanation. As I've said in response to some other questions, the difficulty of these issues never abated. And after the Secretary approved, so in other words, there was a difficult decision leading up to the one that the Secretary made, and then after that decision, that continued, including in my own. I mean, these are not easy questions. This is not something that I did, as you say, as a rubber stamp or did lightly. I continued to stew on that, frankly. And I talked with people, and I heard from Mr. Mora, made sure that I alerted the secretary. I had daily meetings with the secretary and the chairman and so forth, and I made sure they were aware of this continuing concern. Over time, I went back from time to time to the secretary and ultimately convinced him that we needed to take another look at what he had recommended, or what he had approved, pardon me, what I had recommended, what he had approved, and convinced him that he should rescind his approval, which he did on the 12th of January, as I recall. I believe it was a Sunday, because I got a call from General Hill. That decision was memorialized on the 15th of January. In preparing that rescission document for the secretary, I recommended that he instruct me to set up a working group to look at this more thoroughly, which I did. And I don't want to take up all of your time, but the point is that there was a very, very thorough, broad-gauged, multidisciplined look at how we, the Department of Defense, should deal with this problem going forward.
You think you're aware of the tensions between too much aggressiveness and the need to get information and the legality and the treaties and the law and the policies of the United States? So you feel like you were wrestling with all those issues as you made these decisions in a fair and objective way?
Well, sir, let me point out again, the decision to employ particular techniques was not mine to make, but in the course of trying to come up with recommendations for the Secretary, all of those things that you've described were in the mix, so to speak. There was...
You concluded they were lawful.
Well, yes, sir, but the they that you're talking about now, when you're talking about the working group, is a different set of interrogation techniques that the Secretary of Defense approved in April of 2003.
Okay, well, let's get that straight. So you, after the first approval or disapproval of a number of the requested techniques, and you approved a certain number, you continued to look at that, and you recommended to the Secretary of Defense that some of those not be approved in the future, and to be taken off the approved list, and you restricted further the request of the Guantanamo Task Force for approval of techniques.
Yes, sir, that's generally correct. There were other people involved in that, but that was my view.
And now the persons, explain, take a moment and explain what you meant when Senator Reid and you discussed the question of medical review being, the people being interrogated be monitored for medical review or psychological review, that there would be a command review and of these conditions, and what role of approval did General Hill, the four-star commander of Southcom, what role did he play in having to approve the utilization of extraordinary techniques?
Well, there is a document that lays that out that was embodied the Secretary of Defense's decision in April of 2003 that lays out those approval levels. Some things could be delegated, some decisions about interrogation approaches could be delegated below General Hill, but some decisions needed to be approved by the combatant commander, General Hill, in that case.
Did the interrogators, what requirements did they have on them with regard to observing the physical condition of a individual being interrogated, or well, they have to watch out for their health? What requirements were placed on that?
Well, that was a fundamental requirement. There was an obligation to safeguard the people who had been captured and to keep them healthy and safe and secure. And so there was the fundamental humane treatment requirement that the President had demanded of the armed forces from the beginning of the war. But even during the interrogations, of course, there was particular attention required of those people who were involved in the interrogations, including medical care and psychological care, as well as the interrogator and legal oversight.
And failure to do that would have been in violation of military standards.
And of the direct order.
Now, just to sort of wrap that up, there was a Bybee memo by the Department of Justice, not the Department of Defense, and that memo has been criticized, and that's the one that was withdrawn. Is that not correct?